Hello and welcome to the Bitcoin Mentor podcast. Today I'm delighted to be joined by Nathan Fitzsimmons. Hi Nathan, how are you?
I'm doing well, Jake. I'm doing pretty well today. How are you, my friend?
I'm very, very good and also very excited to hear about your Bitcoin journey. Like we've crossed paths in this experience that is Bitcoin Mentor, but not had the chance to actually sit down and have a conversation. So very excited to find it all out, to be honest. And it's always the case with people in the Bitcoin space. So you'll be aware of where I like to take these conversations. So same format as before. Really, we just want to learn about you. Like, where did you grow up? What did you learn about? How did you come across Bitcoin? And just dig into what that brings up. So perhaps you can just
Sure.
wind the clock back, remember what it was like, I don't know, 5 years old, 10 years old, 20 years old, wherever you want to start.
Well, let's see here. How far back do I want to go? So I am fourth generation Calgarian in Alberta. My son is fifth generation, which isn't too common for the towns out here. So I've been here my entire life. I grew up kind of west of the city, and I'm still there now today in a small town just outside of Calgary, not too far from my folks and even my childhood home, which is nice. So been in Canada all my life, and it's funny. I've ventured around the world for different purposes, but I've always just been stationed here. So even if we're winding the clock, I went to the same high school that my dad went to, and then from there I went to the university in Calgary, the one in town. I didn't travel far at that point either. And then I've then continued to work at said university since first starting there as an undergrad. So that's been kind of the life journey, but that doesn't really tie into the Bitcoin side of things. That's a
Well, we can get to
bit
that.
of a
That's
different
fine.
offshoot. Yeah.
I'm immediately intrigued. So when you say a fourth generation Calgarian, why is
Yeah.
that the case that it's quite rare? Like you mentioned, it's not that often you meet people like
Uh
that. And where was your family from before then?
so the surname goes back to Ireland, but I've got basically just a whole bunch of what I would call what you get like Anglo-Saxon mutt kind of hanging out in there. So I've got some Ukrainian, Russian, German, like English. Everything's all kind of thrown in. And in Calgary, being kind of a younger Western city in Canada, there's not too many people here that have been here for a long period of time. The city really boomed in the 90s, I think it was, kind of with energy prices at the time. It's a huge energy kind of focused area. And so most people that you meet or run into, they could be the first generation to the city or just completely newcomers, right? And the city has grown by leaps and bounds over the last, say, 2 decades or so.
Okay,
Like
cool.
even the area that I'm in currently was rural farmland when my dad was growing up. That's all now houses and developments, and it just keeps expanding and expanding and expanding.
Wow. Yeah, and I guess what I'm learning, so I'm now based in Australia, and having grown up in the UK, everywhere is a blend of everything in so many senses, in terms of like people's ethnicity and backgrounds. And like here in Australia, you meet people from all sorts of different parts of the world that call themselves Australian, but like actually not too distant past were somewhere very, very different, including myself. Like I never thought I would live here when I was growing up, but now I do. You never know where life takes you in that sense. And that's cool. Okay, it's great to learn a little bit about Calgary. I don't know much about it myself. And so you mentioned getting into university and working at the uni. So what's your area of specialization if you had to have one? And why do you decide to do that?
Let's see here. So I was going into university at around like 16. I was ahead in school. My mom started me earlier, so I was always the runt of the litter, the young one. Well, when I was a 16-year-old kid, they come to you and go, "Okay, decide what you're going to do for the rest of your life." And I had no idea. I was like, I don't know. I'm pretty good at school. A doctor. Doctor sounds good. Mom's dad was a doctor, grandfather on that side. It seems to be a honorable career choice. And so, just like a teenager who can't even buy beer yet, I was like, yeah, I'll sign up to go to school for biology and then try to get into med
Forever.
school. Yeah, right. Again, having like no real world experience to speak of or any idea to point me in the right direction of what I'd even key into. And what I found very quickly was there was no passion whatsoever. And
Mm.
so I did fine, but not great because about year two or so into university, I had the 4 year bachelor's there. The kids that want to go into med school, they really want to go into med school. And that's their entire focus, their entire drive. It turns out I was much more interested in drinking at the bar and playing in punk bands. That was way more fun for me. I did not care about getting into med school. But even at that point, I was halfway through my degree. I'm like, I got to just do something, right? I got to finish this at least. And so I have something to work with. Because again, always felt kind of very directionless, never could find that one area that I really tapped into. I mean, kind of going off that, I did pursue music, and even in hindsight, I wish I would have taken it a little more seriously, but I had a lot of fun with it. But if I could do it all over again, I never would have gone to university. I would have done a trade. I would have gone straight back to the trade. Because even during my years at the university as a student, I didn't really get along with the kids there. And it wasn't that they were bad or yeah, it wasn't that they were bad people. It's just I got along with like the Sparkies and the plumbers and the trades guys way more than I did the kids that were, even in the engineering department. We didn't have as much in common. We didn't seem to view things the same way, and I'm not sure if that comes from more of like an entrepreneurial and blue-collar kind of background with the family, but I liked hanging out at the trade school more than I liked hanging out at the student bar at U of C. So, again, there can tell very quickly it's not really the place for me, but, we'll finish it up and we've got something to kind of continue with. And so continuing even on that thread, it would have been my first year there, I got a position in medical research at an animal facility there. It paid great for as a kid, and it was perfect with my university schedule because they only needed me on weekends and holidays, and I only had time on weekends and holidays, and so that paid for the apartment and paid for the beer, and it was actually a really good job in a lot of ways, particularly because it gave me the flexibility over the years that if I wanted to go on little small tours and go pursue music for short periods of time, they were fine with it. They didn't pay me when I was gone, but if you want to take 3 weeks and go live in a van with your buddies, have at her. No worries here. And so I stayed at that job, and I'm still kind of at that job, but it's just kind of changed over the years since about 2007, I want to say, somewhere around there. And so all throughout my degree, I've been working in medical research as an animal technician, kind of like the support staff in the background for these guys. And then after I finished my biology degree, played around in music, but also knew that it's like, okay, we got to do something more. I went back for another degree, and I decided, I had the brilliant idea, because I really liked logic when I was in university. It's like, I'll go back and study philosophy. There's tons of great career paths in philosophy. That was a brilliant idea. And I got about halfway through that degree, and we had an offer to go, my friends, my little band and I, we had an offer to go record in Ontario. And I was like, yeah, I want to go do that. There's no job at the end of a philosophy degree, at least that I could see. And it's like, okay, I would to take a pause on this and go pursue music more. But again, even after that and some tours and some fun there too, it's like I was getting older, right? Getting older, and I've worked in kind of all the different areas of the university in terms of animal, mostly rodent research and stuff as well too. So their conventional area, their biohazard area, their clean areas, and these things too. And again, it was good. It's good work and good pay, but there wasn't really a career there in terms of all the higher level positions. They're all filled, and they're all kind of lifers. Like those people they'll retire in those roles, and they're not really creating new things. And so, again, I was kind of faced with the like, oh shit, I need to grow up a little bit, and let's see if maybe there's something else we can pursue, because we're just kind of stagnant, and that just doesn't ever work with my personality type. And so I went back again. It's like, let's go back. Let's do something else. But this time I learned my lesson. It has to be something with a job at the end of it. I want to capitalize on the education that I already had in terms of using that for like electives towards a degree. But I need something with like, okay, there's a career path that you can kind of find after this. And so I looked at computer science and nursing and engineering. I was like, okay, one of these three seems like a good way to go. Well, for the nursing, I didn't get the human anatomy course done in time, so I couldn't get into the program. For the engineering department, and this was such a piss off at the time too, is that the engineering department same school, wouldn't recognize any of my previous courses towards electives. So like I'd done calculus 1, 2, and 3, and I'd done a whole bunch of different levels of linear algebra because I'm good at math, so it was easy A's for me. I just don't like math. But like, oh, but you didn't take calculus for engineers, so it doesn't count. And so the engineering department was like, yeah, full 5 years. We're not cutting it short at all. And the computer science department was said, yeah, 2 years and you're done. We'll count all those towards like the electives and the options. You just got to do the core course requirement and boom, you're in and out and you're done. And so I was back in university, still in the same town, still at Calgary, still working there, still going to school there. And so I'm back at the university for a computer science degree. And it's not bad. But again, we haven't really tapped into passions at all yet. And in fact, it was in some ways a little bit disappointing. Is I think I was kind of hoping that the program would involve perhaps a little more even of the hardware side and just kind of higher level thinking and maybe a little more practicality, which I think would be more in line with kind of like a computer IT technician kind of role. But realistically, it was just learning different computer programming languages, which just translates to I'm really good at looking up stuff on Google. That's it. I'm just really good at finding. It's like, okay, someone's already solved this problem. Here's the code that I need, which even now with the large language models, that'd be even easier. And so I was back for the third degree, and I got about 3/4 of the way through that, and the clean facility, the double barrier facility that I was working in terms of research, again, been there for years at this point, sometimes full-time, sometimes part-time, just kind of in and out, depending on whatever else was going on in my life. This all lines up with meeting the wife. And I'm not sure.
Oi. Shout out to the wife.
Yeah. This changes the trajectory. Everything's kind of coinciding around here because it was actually I can remember it very vividly. It was 2016 because it was leading up to the Trump election. Because I can remember both thinking that like he's gonna win and everybody thinking I was fucking crazy. And then I remember in Canada, people in the bar freaking out when it did happen. But Jake, I'm not sure if you've ever played in punk bands, but they're high time preference, not necessarily a lifestyle you want to live forever. And it would have been about 2015, 2016, somewhere in there, that I had that kind of gaze into the future. It's like, okay, if nothing changes, where am I in 5 years? And that just looked like hell. I had that kind of like, I'm coming up on 30s. Like 20s is a different game. I'm coming up on 30s. I don't want to be in the exact same spot in 5 years. That's not okay. I know I can do better. And so all this, and then even with that, meeting the wife around this time as well too. So I had just met what would be my wife, and funny enough, I did meet her at a bar after 2 a.m. after close, where she was DD for an old vocalist of mine. But I'd already come to that realization, like, nope, we're changing paths. We're going down a different area. So it's funny actually, because that night I asked her if she wanted kids in marriage within like the first hour of meeting her, because I just had no time anymore. It's like I don't care if you're not interested in kids in marriage. It's fine. You go talk to one of the other guys. I'll be good.
Whoever you like, yeah.
Right. And so where I was going with that is I'd been with her for a couple months, and then getting back to kind of career and where I've landed, there was an opportunity at the place that I was working while still kind of doing the computer science degree. One of the higher level kind of managerial roles came up. And right at the same time, a new facility was opening up as well too. And so I'd applied for both these positions. So a leadership position in the facility, or one of the facilities I've been in for years, and taking on kind of a new project. And I got both. I actually got both positions offered to me. And I ended up pivoting and taking the new startup with the idea that it's good pay bump. I had to drop out of the computer science degree. Both are full-time, so I dropped out of another degree and went and took this on because it felt like a bit of a lateral move. But it was the opportunity to build it from the ground up. Like the painting wasn't even done at this point in time. And so I knew that there would be more opportunity for advancement for positions that didn't even exist yet. And it was a new challenge. And so for the last 7 years, I've been working in a specific niche field that's germ-free work. So I specifically work with animals that are completely germ-free, living in isolators. So no bacteria, fungi, virus, nothing, right? They're like, if you ever seen Jake Gyllenhaal, Bubble Boy, no. That's the stuff that I'm doing now. And it's been good, but it still wasn't the calling.
Yeah, of course. There's a big orange thing that rocks up in your life. You're like, hang on a second. Don't ruin it, though. We don't want to get there too quick.
There sure was. And so I feel like that was quite the life career ramble there.
Sure no, let's do it. I mean, I like to have organic conversations. So I don't really prepare.
Me too.
And I just feel into what attracts me from what you talk about, and I've got like half a page of notes, so
Okay.
we could do like a 10-hour podcast, no problem. I have to talk about punk bands because
Okay.
there's something like there's something seriously fuck you about a punk band. You know what I mean? Like it's just it's all attitude. The finesse isn't always there, but that doesn't matter because the message is more important. And if that was like my kind of analysis of punk in a sense. So why did you join a punk band? And what was like the funnest part of it, and what was the really shittest part?
Oh god. Okay, so the shittest part and the funnest part are probably one and the same too. So there's a lot to unpack there.
Like,
right? Oh god, there was, and again, like looking back on it, and it's like, okay, what do I tell my kids and what do I don't? Because I was such a piece of shit at times. And it's like, I am so lucky to have come out of it. And then also, like, there's some friends who are still kind of living that, like, scene lifestyle, still working bars and these things, too. And again, as you just get older and as you kind of get a little more clarity, and it's easy in today's society. I was, which we can get into more detail later, is like, I had come to libertarian and Austrian economic viewpoints long before Bitcoin. But that only led me to be nihilistic about it, in the sense that, like, well, fuck it. We can't actually win at this game. We might as well just have a stupid fun party while we can. And so getting back to what was like the best part about the punk bands. Well, it's funny because the first thing that popped to mind is that it wasn't metal. And the only reason I bring that up is because I've always been big into metal, into metalcore and deathcore, kind of that like 2000s era stuff, right? And so was my guitarist, who, shout out to Adam, is one of the most talented musicians I've ever had the opportunity to work with, and we still hang out and still love that guy. And we both loved metal, but we didn't want to play it live because metal fans are just brutal when it comes to technicality. Like, you'll just have a room full of 50 dudes staring at you going like, I could have done that better. Oh, I heard him push the tempo a little bit there. You're under a microscope in terms of how perfect you have to perform to potentially appease those kinds of audiences, depending on the kind of subgenre. But just generally speaking, metal it's almost like this is terrible phrasing. It's like, fuck it. It's like a technical jerk off. It's like, who can be the fastest, the strongest, the coolest. You're always kind of pushing the boundaries, the heaviest breakdown, whatever it might be, which is great to listen to, but from a performing standpoint puts you in a different position. Where what I played is I played punk rock and I played ska music, which was all about a good time. And it was the funnest thing to do on stage. And it wasn't so much about perfectly executing your pieces, your parts, so much as that kind of crowd interaction, that energy, that like, we're here to have a good time. And so even like the early punk band that I was in, everybody was wireless except for me. And the rest of the band would just go run through the bar. So you'd have my bass player like running across the bar, guitarist has gone off in the corner, and they're in the pit, they're just hanging out with them. And of course, if you got a bunch of people dancing and jumping around with you, you're gonna fuck up from time to time. But it became way more of an experience and so much fun to be a part of. My poor drum kit, they had a habit of, my bass player would tackle me through the drum kit at the end of every set. That was pretty much became a thing at one point in time, to the point where audience members and friends knew this would happen too. So they'd be looking at me being like, is this the last song? And I'd be like, fuck off, my back hurts, please don't. And as soon as that last note, just right through the cymbals, right through, broken gear happened all the time. But it was fun, right? It was that camaraderie, it was that kind of culture, and it was the kind of brotherhood. And there was a lot of anti-authoritarianism and skepticism, but also inbuilt nihilism that we can't potentially actually get ahead, right? So you have a lot of people that are just kind of living for the moment, and again, very kind of high time preference. But looking back on it, the best memories were that these are some of my greatest friends by far, that we would live in a van together with no money and just go play shows across the Canada. And I even did some tours with bands from Mexico and in the US. I did a tour in Australia as well too.
Awesome.
And again, you were broke, but you were so happy. It was just you and the boys, road trip, new place every day, just kind of being idiots and having fun. And I do really cherish those times for when I was younger. But again, at some point it was like, okay, that was fun.
Yeah.
It's time to move on to other ventures. Yeah, it's time to move on to other things. Those are great memories.
Nathan, you touched on fast forwarding 5 years from now, and you don't like the look of that. So what do? Well, you have to change. And
Yeah.
some people don't, because either they don't
Yeah.
even look 5 years ahead, and therefore they just carry on doing the very close day-to-day stuff and just hack through it, or they look 5 years ahead and then they just can't be bothered to do anything about it, and they don't change. And people then wonder why they're in the situation that they're in. And it's like, well, because you didn't do anything about it. So there's obviously like an anti-authoritarian streak in there. And there's nothing better than like really good live music, by the way. Like you just go
Yeah, I
wild.
love it. I love it.
And it doesn't matter
Yeah.
if you miss the beat or whatever, you just rejoin, right? As long as you guys are comfortable enough with your instruments and you know the songs inside out, doesn't matter, right? You can rejoin at any point in some ways. So yeah, good times. That I would have liked to have been at one of those events. So the 5-year view, you're like, oh, this doesn't work for me. So just walk us through that.
I gotta say, so it probably would have been, so in and around this time, I would have been listening to, like, this was when like Peterson was new on the scene as well too.
Yep.
And I listened to a lot of Stefan Molyneux in philosophy that kind of helped with the Mises and Rothbard and kind of ANCAP views and stuff as well there. And so with that, you know what it's you know what it was is I got into a lot of debates in bars, and I always had to be right. And I wanted to figure out the right answer. And I foolishly, when I was younger too, thought that, okay, if I can logically reason and prove my case, they'll change their mind because everybody wants to be right? Like that's what will happen, which is in no way near the case. But it was in pursuit of kind of going down the rabbit hole of economics in particular, and then getting into the ideas of low time preference and these things too, that for whatever reason, the morality associated with it and the fulfillment and stuff too, because you get into a lot of, oh, capitalism is just greedy and these things too. It's like, no, because you can have these other incentives that are still, self-interested, but they're not going to lead you to just destroy the environment because you care about your kids. I always was very pro-natalist. And so it's kind of in evaluating these and really wanting to settle down, it's like, okay, well, I'm going to have to provide, right? And as fun as music was, and being able to do music and still work in research and have funds that way too, it wasn't going to be able to, in Canada, be able to afford anything for the family. And I wanted to be able to afford a family. And I'm trying to remember who it was, but I think it was some podcast. It was something where it was like, you have to be the kind of person that the person you want will be attracted to. And that just, for whatever reason, really hit home. It's like, hey, if I want this kind of quality of partner,
type thing. Yeah,
then I gotta be that quality of partner. Do you remember Blink-182? What's My Age Again?
Well, is that a specific track? I remember the band.
A specific song.
I don't remember that specific track.
It was a song from, like, and again, still love Travis as a drummer and these things too. There was this line in that song where they reference themselves being 23. Nobody, I forget the exact line, but no one cares when you're 23. And I remember when I hit my 23rd birthday, because I remember listening to that song as a kid and then actually thinking that's so far in the future. Yeah. And then getting there and being like, ooh.
Shit, I'm 23. Okay. Yeah.
Shit, I'm 23 now. And then I remember what it was. There was another moment when I hit 26. That was a big, like, I got to get my shit together. When I hit 26, I was still just living with roommates and doing whatever. And I felt like I hadn't really accomplished anything or built anything. And at 26, my dad had already had me and the company. And I was like, fuck, I'm falling behind. I need to get things in order fast or I'm not going to be able to catch up. And then again, being in that punk scene, like lots of friends in these things too, but lots of sad stories where you can see exactly where they're going. And there's a difference between being that person at 20 and being that person in your mid 40s that it's like, it's kind of terrifying. We're supposed to progress beyond these things at some point. You don't want to be stuck in this kind of Peter Pan forever adolescence, right? And so all these things kind of culminating, comparing myself to my dad and realizing that I'm past halfway in the 20s. We're not, we're getting to the closer and closer to 30. I was like, if I change nothing, what happens to me? And it's not somebody that I want to aspire to be. And so I got to start looking for opportunities. And that's what it was too, is that at the time, although things have kind of shifted now, which is fantastic. At the time it was, okay, this was a line that I heard from Mike Rowe of Dirty Jobs. It was, don't follow your passions. It was follow opportunities and bring your passion with you. And so I saw these opportunities for career advancement and growth at work. I'm like, I'm going to go and I'm going to be the best that they've ever seen because I'm coming from an entrepreneurial and sort of free market mindset in a university environment. I'll be the best one. I'm not going to be a union clock in and clock out. I'll do everything I can to take care of this place. And it worked out really well in that sense. So, yeah, that was kind of all the culmination. Then you combine that with like meeting what would be my wife, and it's like, I got to get my shit together because my salary will not be able to afford all the things that we want to do and that I think she deserves.
Yeah, absolutely. One's future wife, not is it just in a sense, a vision that you have to bring into reality, but also such a good, well, my experience as well, having got married, like it's your co-founder of life essentially, and you have to figure out, well, what life do we want, and okay, how do we make that happen? And they're really hard questions. Initially, it's like,
and in detail too. you got to do, you got to do it in detail too. No, I completely agree. And it also, for anyone who's not married yet, 10 out of 10 recommend it because it makes your life so much better and your ability to focus and get so much more done is incredible. I don't know about you, Jake, but wife and I don't do the whole, like, I have some friends that do, and I find it silly. Like, split everything 50-50. It's like, that's stupid. I'll do one job that I'm really good at, and you do what you're really good at, and we'll get way more efficient, like specialization in the free market, and we can get so much more done. My productivity, my earning potential, everything has skyrocketed because I have my wife running the house. I've even seen, maybe this is like too much information too, but like my credit has just gone up and up and up. And it's like, I haven't touched finances in years. I just make the money and give it to her.
There you go. That's probably a good investment strategy, isn't it? It's like I used to joke, my wife is my head of due diligence.
Yes.
Like, if I can't get it past you, then it's a shit idea.
It's a bad idea. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. I'm loving this journey. So you meet a lot of people on the Bitcoin journey, and they all come at it with slightly different angles. And I always find it interesting when someone has a libertarian and Austrian economics view, and equally computer science. Maybe you learned about a bit of that before Bitcoin came along. And the rational result is nihilism. So, well, I can't change central banking, so we're all fucked. Is kind of the result, right? Inflation's not going away. You mentioned time preference a few times. Walk us through what it was like getting into Austrian economics and what it meant to be potentially libertarian pre-Bitcoin. Like, what were your sources of information? You mentioned like arguing in bars. There is nothing better than arguing in a pub sometimes. You know what I mean? Like, you get more and more pissed.
You get
more
such
right.
a row.
Like, I'm right. It's like you're both just making noise at that point. But yeah, I'd love to learn more about that experience.
Yes. I'll never forget too. I just got to tell you this one little quick anecdote because God bless him. My bartender was one of my closest friends. Still is. I haven't seen him in a long time, but he was even at like my wife and I's wedding and these things too. And I could remember like really getting into it one night because again, in the punk scene, and I want to touch on that as well too, it's mostly left, but it was left anti-authoritarianism, at least in the people that I met, right? We're coming from that kind of, it was very like anti-neocon, George W. Bush, kind of war in Iraq was still the kind of hot topic, right? I can just remember like really getting into it with friends. And again, we're all friends, but it'll get heated. And everyone steps out for a smoke at one point in time. I look at the bartender and go, I'm going to smash a glass, okay? I promise I'll pay for it and I'll clean it up, but I want to do it for dramatic effect. And so as soon as everybody came back in, we get back into it like, this is ridiculous. And throw it down on the bar. But going back even to the kind of punk roots and libertarianism, so you're right. It was incredibly nihilistic and it was very lonely. And it was unfortunately very disappointing as I got older and things progressed as well too. Because when it was like the early 2000s and the conservatives, neocons were in charge, anti-authoritarianism kind of fell on the left side, right? I remember when weed was still illegal in Canada, and it was very much like, no, it's absolutely should not be a crime what you put in your body. There's no victim here. The government has no business telling people what they should and shouldn't do voluntarily, right? And so when that kind of anti-authoritarian punk ethos was going up against you can control more of an authoritarian right or religious right, I remember Manson and Columbine and everything around censorship around those moments too. When the kind of, in the U.S. who've been the Christian kind of conservative and in Canada still kind of conservative, when they were in power and the anti-authoritarian kind of punk was against them, I agreed. It's like, yeah, absolutely. There's no reason any drug should be illegal. Use of any drug should not be illegal in my opinion because it's completely, there's no victim, right? It's a voluntary exchange and whatever people are putting in their body. I can't see an ethical issue with that, right? And so at the time, it was all very much so aligned. And I'll never forget, you know how you just hear these things, and again, there's little nuggets that stay with you, and they actually have a major impact, and they come to see that kind of, it takes form in your personality. It was Matt Stone or Trey Parker from South Park. I remember listening to them in an interview, and they said either it's okay to make fun of everything or nothing. And that kind of free speech ethos and that kind of libertarian voluntarism ethos that I saw in these kind of circles and groups like really stuck with me. And so for me, it was always anti-authoritarianism. It wasn't leftism, if that makes sense. What the disappointing thing was, and why I became very nihilistic and why I was the one getting in debates with people in bars and these things too, is as the new kind of regime in the West came into power, I was still anti-authoritarian, right? So even though that the policies that you want are now being enacted, it's like, no, you don't need to do this by force, and I'm still opposed to big government and the collusion between government and corporation, that kind of lobbyist mentality. So I stayed anti-authoritarian, whereas I saw all my peers stay on the left, and now that their team was still winning, they were still arguing with like the Warhawks from the 2000s. And so I realized going through it that this is egotistical. I was principled and they were not, was kind of what came to mind. And I thought that was kind of the norm. Like, no, we want to get to the root of it, and, we can reason our way to it, and that you want to apply the rules universally, right? Well, for me, it'd be like not equality in terms of, at least in the government circumstances, kind of the rules are going to be enforced, right? Even though, I'm more the anarchist view at this point. But it was when the things that you like are the ones being forced through, the principles kind of get cast aside, that I, for whatever part of my body, and I think it's genetic, I couldn't go with that. And so I was with them when they were opposed to kind of the right, but I wasn't with them when different team got into power. And that became, again, very isolating, right? Like, I'd be the only one for a complete free market, voluntarist, capitalist side of the argument. And going back into why I went down these rabbit holes is because I was arguing with a bar full of socialists and communists, and I'm pretty sure I was right, but I wanted to be right, so I kept reading and reading and reading, and as I kept going and going to improve upon my arguments, because that's what I wanted to do, you just go further and further down the rabbit hole, but you feel very, very much so alone. You realize that the guiding principles aren't necessarily shared with people that you thought that they were.
Oh my gosh, Nathan, so much to draw on there, and many parallels in my own life. No, it's awesome. The two things I want to draw on from what you just said. One is the idea of loneliness, and that's really hard when you think you think you figured something out, but why does no one else see that way? And that's, in some ways, that's luck. You just happen to have figured it out before anyone else did, but in other ways, it's like really hard because you just can't really understand why people think differently. But you talk about principles, and it reminded me, I mean, really one of the best books I've ever read is Seyfedin Ammus's Principles of Economics. And, having studied business and investing in economics for a huge portion of my life as well, Austrian economics only arrived in my life after getting into Bitcoin. But it's a lens on the world that actually does give you some founding principles from an individual's perspective that actually makes sense. And I think back to like all of these, crazy Keynesian funded business school classes that I went through as a like 20 to 22-year-old getting my bachelor's in business management, where it didn't make sense, but it didn't matter that it didn't make sense because all we had to do was regurgitate an exam, party like animals, and get the degree that you needed to then go and make some money. And it was like the last hurrah before, you had to get into the real world. I didn't do it for education purposes necessarily. It was more just like go and have fun whilst you still can. And that's so stupid. So lots in common in that sense. But you touched on the word genetic. So what's genetic about your approach to looking at the world like that?
Oh, well, that one, what I was referring to specifically is, so before Bitcoin, I had never met another kind of ANCAP, someone with that kind of, it's extreme. It is an extreme position. That's just, everybody's just for violence, in my opinion, but that's aside. Completely unaware. The only other person I met before Bitcoin that shared those views and beliefs and had read a lot of the same work and is now pursuing it at university as well too, was my younger cousin. We had no idea. It was, he lives in the States. We see each other at Christmas. It wasn't very often, and I forget how it came up, but it was like the holy crap moment that the only other ANCAP I meet just happens to be very closely related to me.
Yeah.
And that seemed like it just couldn't necessarily be a coincidence. And of course, if you do look at personality structure and political leanings, they do tend to go hand in hand. Even if we just start with the base assumption that personality is at least somewhat driven by genetics, I'm well aware that I'm extremely disagreeable by nature. Meaning that if it's right, I don't really care how you feel about it. And it's funny because my wife is that way as well, too. So you can imagine we have a good row every now and then. But whoever's right ends up coming
healthy.
out on top. Right, exactly. And so that's what I meant by in terms of genetics. And it's funny, though, because even just expanding and kind of going the other direction, too, having the kind of biology background as well, too, and then combining that with Austrian economics, you're really just looking for mechanistic explanations of things. And evolution is just kind of a play on incentives as well, too, right? It's like, what is the system geared toward? How do you win in the system, whether it be money or survival? And then you can kind of figure out the pressures that are going to push things in certain directions. So the two line up. But yeah, I was blown away that the only other anarchist I met just happened to be my cousin.
Wow. And I can't help but think that parenting, it obviously, I mean, having had kids of my own, the environment that the child is in is hugely influential to how they think and how they behave. But there is probably some genetics to it in that sense. And so whether you guys as cousins have, your fathers were brothers or, brother and sister, I don't know, it doesn't really matter. The point is that there'll be very similar philosophy households to an extent. Well, we are like flying through this, Nathan. We're almost like coming up to 40 minutes and we haven't really talked about Bitcoin. So we should do that. And why I always like to try and get a lot of this backstory in first is it primes us to understand, okay, well, actually, you drew on this, and this to go, Bitcoin's important. So if you could pull together, what were the kind of 3 or 4 major things out of all of what you just talked us through that helped you go, okay, I must explore this Bitcoin more?
So it was, hands down, the biggest influence would have been just the libertarian and Austrian economics background and ethos there. So sound money argument, like I'm already sold. I'm just at this point that like gold can't work, right? Even Lynn Alden's argument, I know others have made it as well too, in the sense that it just can't travel at the speed of commerce and it can be still centralized and controlled. And it'd be nice if we could agree to go back to that. But even the incentives to control and centralize the gold for those that do ends up being incredibly powerful. So we just repeat the system over and over again.
Yeah.
And so I didn't have to be convinced of the value proposition of Bitcoin. I just needed to see it. Of course, everyone thinks they got in late. Every single person thinks they got in late, and so do I. And I kick myself, and it goes back to that high time preference punk asshole back in the day. It's because I'm not going to save money. I knew sound money theory and why it was important, but I put myself in the position of I'm not going to invest. I'm not going to save anything, so why bother? So even when Bitcoin had come up little blips here and there along the radar, I never looked into it because I never thought of myself as preserving any capital. I was like, I'm just going to travel and whatever. It didn't particularly matter. And it goes back to then looking at the future, staring 5 years down the road, meeting my wife, and trying to figure stuff out. And like a lot of people, it was COVID, right? And so I already had this natural anti-authoritarian specifically bent. And I know that sound money would be a better system, but I don't think it can necessarily happen. And so I'm with my wife. I'm trying to remember. Where were we? So I think it would have been, I would have been married at this point or coming up on it, but saving up for a down payment. So this is the first time really that I've ever had substantial amounts of money to me kind of still hanging around. And I start seeing everything going on in, I think, the winter of 2019 and then coming into the early spring of 2020. And I'm watching this and I know exactly how this movie's going to play out. And I go, if I don't do something, I'm fucked. I'm never buying a house. This will run away from me in terms of inflation faster than I'll be able to keep up with it. I need to do something with my money because I'm really concerned about preserving that purchasing power. I can get the thing so I can have the family, so I can have the future that I want to run towards. And so I'm like, I got to buy gold. It's got to be gold. But as soon as I start looking at that, I go, like, the taking custody of it, securing it, the haircut you get if you need to liquidate it. I'm like, let me just pause for a second and reinvestigate Bitcoin before I toss it into gold. Because I knew it was still sitting in the back of my mind. It took about a week. I burnt through the Bitcoin Standard. I burnt through the Book of Satoshi. I'm trying to remember what else there was at that time. But that was enough for me. That was enough for me to basically be kicking myself, going, "What the hell was I doing the last few years? This is what you were looking for the entire time. You had no reason to be pessimistic. The answer was right here. And I was just done. And then by the nature of the work that I do, I'm very good at it, and I've been doing it for a very long time. So a lot of it is autopilot. So I'm listening to audiobooks and podcasts for about 7 hours per day. And so it really turned into 7 hours a day straight on Austrian economics and Bitcoin and learning the technicals and just absorbing everything
Down
that I
the hole,
could.
baby.
Oh, just head first off the cliff, straight down the hole, throwing everything I had into it because I already knew, like, I knew in theory that it would work. I just didn't know that it existed. And it didn't take long for me to go, oh, crap, everything, full attention.
As
this
each
is
hour
where I
goes
want
by,
to be.
it's like, am I mad? Am I mad? Am I mad? And it's like, no. The further you go, it's crazy.
And even going back to being the guy, being the complete voluntarist free market guy, arguing with the communist and socialist punks in the bar at 4 a.m, I was already in disagreeable time. I was already predisposed to everyone thinking I was crazy, and that was fine. It's like, if no one sees this, like, that's fine. I see it, and I'm so confident that I will bet the family's future on it. I will go all in because I think it is the winning strategy. And also goes back to that kind of principled aspect, is it very quickly became the moral and the ethical imperative as well too. It was the ideological reasons very quickly that it was, I don't just want to have these opinions and not live them. I want to go all in on this, and if I'm wrong, at least I tried doing what I think was right. And that really, really, really was important to me. In particular, like with the COVID times, and man, for anyone who didn't have a strong partner and was against everything that was going on, my heart goes out to you. Because family, friends, everyone thought I was a fucking asshole because I didn't want to participate, right? Because I already had that government skepticism to begin with. It's like, I don't want to do this. This seems really wrong to me. And thank God I had my wife, because as long as she loved me, and like even with the Bitcoin too, as long as she loves me and she believes in me, fuck everybody else, I'll be fine. I was already very much wanting to be in a voluntarist world, and so something that I thought could aid in that and would align the incentives with that, I was all for. And then the need to protect myself and my family is like, I have to do something. And those are all really what led to it, right? I was very much, in terms of somebody primed to be orange pilled, I don't think I could have been any more. Like, not that you can go back and change these things too, but if I would have had, like, I didn't have any friends that introduced me as well too, right? So if I would have had a buddy or somebody who's like, you got to check this out, I would have been in probably as soon as they showed it to me. But it had to be the kind of outside media, podcast, books influence coming in, because I didn't have that person in my life to kind of direct me down that way. Going back even to the kind of lonely aspect and stuff as well too.
But it's where this experience is quite spiritual. And
oh yeah,
it's not just the technology that you can build a different life upon, because that's obviously important, but it's like information travels unfairly. In the investing world, a well-known fact, that whole saying, if you buy the rumors, sell the news, like they've been doing this for years, right? They pump their bags when they can, and then they crash the market on purpose, essentially. And that's okay. But once you start to figure out that that's going on, you can make your own decisions that might be different. But once you see Bitcoin, you can't unsee it. And it's just divine timing when you suddenly see it. There's really no other way of manipulating or kind of engineering that. It just happens to be, okay, those things all slotted in at the same time. It's like, okay, bang, I've got to really look at this thing. Okay, let's talk a little about Bitcoin Mentor. So here we are a few years down the line from COVID and diving down this rabbit hole of exploration, and you use the phrase all in. Maybe first just describe to us, like, what does all in mean to you? And then how's Bitcoin Mentor come about, and what's your experience been getting involved with the company?
So when I say all in, I mean, it is the only asset besides my house. And I very, very pro-natalist, pro-family, 10 out of 10 recommend kids for everybody. So besides my house, if you want to include that as an asset, which I would actually define as a durable consumer good, the only asset I have is Bitcoin. That's it. And the additionally, I really enjoy macro economics and even looking at the charts and these things too. I don't participate in trading because I don't think for 1 second that I've got an edge, but I do in Bitcoin. And I think it's that information asymmetry. This is something that I understand, and I understand why I have the thesis about it. So I'm going to put everything, time, attention, spare cash flow, everything into it. And because it was so aligned with those principles and values, it's a really nice feeling to think that the time I spent trying to figure out what the most ethical and moral systems would be would then potentially turn into wealth gain for me and my family. That's a really nice kind of sentiment. It's like, okay, I was legitimately trying to argue the most ethical position and try to, like, I had to understand, like, there must be a right answer. I hate anything with exceptions. There can't be exceptions, or it's not a rule, right? It's just a subjective feeling to some extent. And so to have that then come back and be like, hey, by the way, this completely aligns with your worldview, and if it's right, your worldview is then taking care of you. You trying to do what's morally and ethically right and advocate for will then also take care of you. It's like that's a wonderful feeling. And so time, attention, money, everything I could thrown at Bitcoin. And it goes back to that kind of earlier statement, because now I have to like pause and reevaluate it, because I realized that, like, with music, I had so much fun and had so many opportunities to travel and have amazing memories and times with my friends. But it was like passion but not opportunity. And so I switched gears. And Bitcoin revealed possibly both, because I'd always been so envious of some of my cousins and my dad and my uncles and these things too, because I always wanted to be the entrepreneur. I always did, but I never felt like I had a good enough idea. I guess even personality-wise might be more suited for like managerial kind of role. I never had that like great creative spark where like I got to start this company and I got to run with it. But I always loved talking shop with family and friends too. I had been looking constantly, we'll say for the last year or so, it's like, are there any opportunities that I can work in Bitcoin? Because I am spending all my time here because I want to. And if I can turn that into a job, if I can turn that into a career, if I can turn that into a source of revenue, I might actually get to have one of those jobs. People say, if you love your job, you never work a day in your life. I was working every day for the most part. I would really love to have a few days where I got paid and I didn't have to work, right? The greatest feeling in the world would be that you get to do something that you love and enjoy, and at the end of it, people hand you money and say thank you. Like, that's just incredible. And so,
it's a good trade.
Right?
Yeah.
It's a really good trade. It's like, I had a great time and thank you for your money, I suppose. This is fantastic. And that's, again, going even back to that kind of voluntarist mindset, as I was well aware that wealth is created when both parties are voluntarily exchanging because they both feel better off. I mean, if someone's saying thank you to me and handing me their cash, they feel better off and I feel better off and everyone's wealthier and happier. And so going back to looking ahead, definitely like the ambitious nature in me, particularly with having more and more kids and another one on the way, is I got to keep going. I got to keep building. And again, having my wife be so supportive to free me up to pursue such things. I want to say it was at least the last year, maybe more, where I was just watching job posting forums, cold emails and stuff too. I would take on perhaps an internship or something. I was looking for something, because going to something that Jeff Booth said, I wanted to spend more time in the system that I want to be a part of.
Yeah.
I want to live Bitcoin, right? I want to be a part of this. I for everything that I think it will be, is like, I really want to be a part of this, and I want to spend more and more of my time here. And so constantly watching for jobs. But again, I have the computer science, but I'm not a software engineer, and I was never completed or to the strength where I feel like I could pick up any sort of like back-end development or these things too. And having the family, my current role, again, there's not necessarily the passion there, but it does provide for me, right? So kind of golden handcuffs in terms of like, I got dependents. I can't just take necessarily the entry level unless I can do both simultaneously. And so I was watching for jobs. And in fact, and I was starting to apply some, and again, cold emails too. Like, you just never know. One of the best things I ever learned to do is just not be afraid to ask people for stuff. You have no idea how helpful people will be if you just talk to them and see if there's something you can do for them. And people are incredibly helpful most times. It's funny, I'd even applied for a few of Ben's previous positions as well too. And if nothing else, like, it was, your brain knows when you're working towards something that you value, and it's actually very much so paying attention to where you're going. So even spending time on those applications and searching for possible opportunities and trying to come up with something, doing something, even though it didn't amount to anything in the moment, was still rewarding. Because to myself, it's like, okay, you're trying. You're not sitting around doing nothing. We're not moping and complaining. We're seeing if maybe there's something out there. I know that I'm working towards where I want to be. And so it was just from monitoring these posts that I saw the Bitcoin mentor position come up. And funny enough, I think everybody kind of had this experience as well, too. I had just applied for a different job with Ben, and I had no idea that he was even involved with this because they didn't disclose it. And so I couldn't help but just be kind of kicking myself as soon as I see the first kind of emails and things coming back with Ben's face in the videos. I was like, okay, this might actually be a really good fit because it'll allow me to continue with my same source of income. And I just, again, I tried to give it my all on the application, which, by the way, I just loved. I had never been through a job interview process like this that had so many multiple steps involved with it that I thought was just a fantastic way of actually sorting through the applicants. And definitely something, if I had the opportunity to kind of steal that structure, I would, right? Because it was asking for participation, and I think that was perhaps something that they were looking for. Because I know I've had many conversations with friends and businesses and these things too. And a lot of times, and I've done several job hires and interviews as well, a lot of the questions that I'm asking, I'm not actually interested in the answer. I'm more interested in how they came to it, or maybe how they phrase it or how they interpret it. And I can remember one of my cousins, good friend, I used to have a brewery for a while there. And he would always ask people what their favorite beer was when they came for a job interview. And it didn't matter if they hadn't tried any. He was just looking to see that they at least looked at the website and went like, oh, I'd really like to try this one, but I haven't had it yet. They had done some sort of research on the position that showed that they were willing to put in at least a minimal amount of effort to Google search it beforehand to try and repair. And I would do the same sort of thing where I would ask questions that I'm just looking, like it's very obvious if you just search the company once that it would come up. And so that was a bit of a weird tangent from the interview process, but applied for Bitcoin Mentor, wanted to be involved with it, and was incredibly lucky that I'm in the same town as Mike and Ben. So I had the geographical proximity. I had either just or was going to, I'm trying to remember the timeline, I think I would have just briefly met Ben at the Sats market that he started running in Calgary, maybe like a month or two prior. It wasn't long before. I'm trying to remember exactly where those line up in the application
Divine
process.
timing.
But I think it was just, right? It was just a little bit before. And then I have been absolutely blessed, lucky to be a part of this team, and also to, and it's a kind of a benefit of being with Bitcoiners, is that you really do build that trust quickly because there's so much overlapping usually that Mike and Ben have been incredibly generous with their time and resources, and also just giving us a chance to try different things and experiment and use this as a place to almost like a playground to build up ourselves as our own kind of independent companies as well too. And it's been unbelievably rewarding for somebody who's an aspiring entrepreneur to be a part of these conversations and try and grow the business. Has been unbelievable. And the sessions themselves are fantastic.
Yeah, I love it. It's amazing to envisage where Bitcoin Mentor might be in 5 years.
Oh, yeah.
At least from where I'm sitting, the foundations that are put in place, like they're very strong, and the potential is huge for all involved. You talk about incentive alignment, it's just everywhere, which is so cool. Just one last question before we wrap things up, Nathan. You have mentored a couple of people, so you've had some customers.
Yep.
Just to give us a flavor for what it would be like to have you as our Bitcoin mentor, if I was one of your proteges. What's been an example of a problem that you've solved for one of your people that have worked with you?
What have I solved that was a problem? There's been a few of the kind of that you'd expect where, getting very technical, very straight to the point, like getting off the exchange. But I think the problem that I've been solving for my clients is confidence. Is really just that. I've had many wonderful clients who are already on the right path and knowledgeable, and it's almost just the fine tuning and the coaching. We got great people who are coming to us and they're hungry to learn, and they're doing it on their own time as well too. And it's Bitcoin is almost if not more important to them, just as it is to me. And I really view my role as supportive, right? It's a very supportive kind of coaching and guiding them down the rabbit hole. I'm not doing the work for them. I will point out some obstacles. I'll point out some things along the way, but they're doing it all, right? And I've always kind of loved that role. I do love trying to elevate people. I find it really, really rewarding with both friends, even colleagues and these things too. I love being like the guy in the corner rooting for you that might be like, oh, go for it. Do it. You got it. Like, apply to that job. You got to try it. Ask that girl out. Let's go for it. And I find that I'm bringing the same sort of thing to Bitcoin Mentor where a lot of people know where they want to go. And they have a decent understanding of how they're going to get there. It's like, okay, I'm going to run this trail with you, right? I'm just going to be, when you're getting tired or like a little bit lost for a second, it's like, no, back on the path. Let's keep going. Let's keep this pace moving. I'm just trying to coach them and help them execute all the things that they already want to do. And it's been so rewarding. There are people that want to talk about Bitcoin, that are excited to talk about Bitcoin, and they're coming to you to capitalize on the expertise that you already have to fast track them to the same point in the pack, right? I have one fantastic client who she wants nothing more than to bring this information back to her community. I was like, all right, that's a great idea. This is how we spread adoption. This is how we push things forward. Let's get you there. So what are you getting from me? From me, I think it's particularly if you want to be active in Bitcoin as a participant, at least in the network, or potentially in your community, I'm going to try and do my best to help you get to that point as well, too.
Awesome. Yeah, it's that word confidence that really resonates most. And when I first embarked on my own kind of reallocation journey as an investor, like having confidence in what you were doing was really hard. Because it's like you think you can see an opportunity, but now it's like, hang on, I've got to sell this other stuff and buy this stuff. And then if I fuck it up, like it's gone. You know what I mean?
There's like consequences,
paying a few $100 for someone to be like, no, you're making the right call because I did it before and it's really made my life a lot better. Like that is a great trade as well. Yeah. Well, Nathan, thank you so much for your time today. I've absolutely loved this conversation. And we could do, another 9 hours without too much difficulty, I think. Final question is just a handoff. So if someone wants to reach out and get in touch, having listened to this conversation, then how can they do that?
Honestly, just go to bitcoinmentor.io, book that initial session. I might be the best one for you. I might not. Our team is fantastic. I really cannot sing the praises of these guys enough. They work so hard, and they're always communicating the back channels as well, too. So whatever your issue is, or if you see the opportunity in Bitcoin and you want to get there, you want to up your game, you just want a little bit of confidence going in there and doing some large transactions for the first time, we've got somebody for everybody. And if that's not me, that's totally fine. But honestly, just bitcoinmentor.io. You can follow us on all social media platforms as well, too. Book that free discovery session with Mike and see who's the best fit for you.
Awesome. Well, that's a great place to leave it. Thank you so much, Nathan.
You're very welcome, Jake. This has been a fantastic conversation. I can't maybe wait to do it in person one day.
We will, for sure. Thank you.
Beautiful. Cheers, pal.